Okay, so ready to dive deep into genetic engineering?
Let's do it.
Today's topic is one where, the line between science fiction and reality gets kind of blurry.
Definitely.
We've got some great listener-submitted material here, a whole podcast script, actually, and it looks like we'll be tackling the big questions.
Yeah, the ethical considerations.
Like, are we really playing God with this technology?
Huge question.
But also, we're going to be diving into, the potential benefits.
Absolutely, there's a ton.
Curing diseases, or engineering crops that could solve world hunger, that kind of thing.
Right.
But to unpack all this, we've got our expert here.
Happy to be here.
And they're like the master at connecting the dots and seeing the big picture when it comes to these complex topics.
Why try?
This field is moving so fast.
It really is.
Even just in the past few years, there have been major breakthroughs. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think before we get ahead of ourselves and dive into the hypothetical and the what ifs, we got to make sure we're all on the same page.
Right.
Back to basics.
Basics.
Yeah. What is genetic engineering?
Yeah, good point.
At its core, genetic engineering is about making changes to the DNA of an organism.
Okay.
Could be a plant, could be an animal, even us.
Us, humans.
Exactly. And the goal is to achieve a desired outcome.
So we're basically editing the instruction manual of life, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And speaking of editing, I noticed that CRISPR-Cas9 keeps popping up in this script.
Right, CRISPR.
That seems to be the big game changer.
It's revolutionary. Think of CRISPR like a super precise pair of, molecular scissors.
Molecular scissors, I like that.
These scissors can snip out unwanted genes or even replace them with new ones.
Okay, so how does that work in real life? What kind of impact are we seeing?
Well, one example is sickle cell anemia.
Sickle cell, yeah, I've heard of that.
It's a really painful and debilitating genetic disease. But right now, there are clinical trials using CRISPR to edit the stem cells of patients with sickle cell. And early results show a significant reduction in those agonizing pain episodes.
That's incredible. It sounds like we're literally rewriting the script for so many of these inherited diseases.
They're really promising.
So promising.
Yeah.
Now, the script also delves into genetically modified crops.
Right, GMOs.
Which, as we know, can be kind of a controversial topic.
It is, for sure.
So what's the reality there? Are super crops just a pipe dream, or is there some actual progress happening?
Oh, there's real progress. We're past the pipe dream phase. Take golden rice, for instance.
Golden rice, okay.
It's been engineered to be rich in vitamin A.
Vitamin A, interesting.
And it's already making a huge impact in places where vitamin A deficiency is a serious problem.
Okay.
It's helping to prevent blindness in children, which is incredible.
Wow, that's amazing. So these super crops are actually making a difference already.
Yeah, they're out there in the world doing good.
Doing good. But, we can't ignore the big looming question that always seems to come up with genetic engineering.
I know what you're going to say.
The whole "are we playing God" question.
Right, that one.
Where do you think that fear comes from? Why are people so uneasy about this technology?
I think it's natural to be a little, wary when we start messing with the very building blocks of life, It's a huge responsibility.
Right.
And it brings up a lot of ethical questions.
Ethical questions.
But not necessarily biases.
Okay, that's an important distinction. So ethical concerns, definitely, but not necessarily biases.
Exactly.
It's not about being afraid of the science itself. It's about being thoughtful about how we use it.
Right. We have to ask not just can we do this, but should we do this?
Exactly. And the script highlights a lot of those concerns. One that really jumps out is the potential for unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences, yeah, that's a big one.
What if we accidentally create new diseases?
Oh, exactly.
Or disrupt ecosystems in ways we can't predict?
That's a valid concern. It's something scientists are very aware of.
So they're thinking about this.
Absolutely.
Not just kind of charging ahead blindly.
No, very much the opposite.
Okay, good. Good to know. And, one of the biggest fears out there, the one that really gets people talking, is the idea of designer babies.
Yeah, that's where the line between science fiction and reality gets really blurry.
Totally.
And honestly, kind of scary.
So if we have the power to edit genes to prevent diseases, what's to stop us from using that same power to, enhance traits?
Right, like intelligence, athletic ability, even physical appearance.
It's a slippery slope, isn't it? It's like we're holding the keys to evolution itself.
We are.
And it's up to us to decide how we use them.
And that's terrifying to a lot of people. Understandably so.
The script asks its listeners a really thought-provoking question, and it's one I think we should all consider. If we could alter our future children's traits, would we?
Big question.
And should we even have that choice?
That's the even bigger question, isn't it?
It's a question that forces us to confront our values, our beliefs about what it means to be human.
Totally.
Are we aiming for some kind of manufactured perfection?
Yeah.
Or are we like erasing the very things that make us unique, make us individuals?
And that's a conversation we need to have and a choice we need to make very carefully.
Absolutely. But before we get too lost in the ethical maze here, I want to bring it back to the positive potential of genetic engineering.
Okay, yeah. Good idea. Let's not get too doom and gloom.
Because even with all the risks and the unknowns, there's some truly amazing stuff happening in this field.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's a lot to be excited about. There's no doubt about that. We can't forget the immense potential genetic engineering has to, alleviate human suffering.
Absolutely. And not only are we talking about curing diseases that already exist,
Right.
we're talking about preventing them from even being passed down in the first place.
Yeah, to future generations.
The script I mentioned, they brought up cystic fibrosis as an example.
Cystic fibrosis, right?
It's a really devastating genetic disorder.
It is.
But imagine if we could use genetic engineering to make sure that no child is born with that condition ever again.
That would be huge.
Yeah.
And the research is actually moving really quickly in that area.
Really?
Yeah. Scientists are looking at ways to use CRISPR to correct the genetic mutations that cause cystic fibrosis.
Okay.
But, before birth, in embryos.
So we're talking about preventing the disease from even existing.
That
That's
is-
mind-blowing.
It is.
It's like we're on the verge of a whole new era of preventative medicine.
It's pretty amazing.
But of course, as we've already talked about, there are those concerns about where we draw the line.
Right, yeah.
The script also touches on this.
Yeah.
Concerns about using genetic engineering to enhance human capabilities
Enhanced.
beyond what we consider normal.
Yeah, the designer baby debate. Exactly.
Critic. It's a big one.
If we're okay with editing genes to prevent a disease, what's to stop us from editing genes to boost, intelligence?
Sure. Or athleticism.
Or even physical appearance?
Right. It's a slippery slope. It is. It really is. And that gets to the heart of what we value as a society.
Exactly.
Are we all about individual choice, or are we heading towards a society where some people are just inherently,
Better than others.
Yeah, better than others.
Yeah. And who gets to decide what better even means?
Right, exactly. It's a question that makes you stop and think, for sure. And the script brought up another point that I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
The potential for genetic engineering to actually make social inequalities even worse.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Access and equity are huge concerns.
So if these technologies become available, who's going to have access to them?
Exactly.
Is it going to be, another tool for the wealthy to kind of further their advantages?
Right.
While everyone else gets left behind?
This is a very real possibility.
It's almost like we're writing a whole new chapter in human history.
Yeah.
And we've got the pen in our hand.
And we need to be careful what we write.
Very careful. Because the words we choose, they're going to have consequences.
Long-term consequences.
The script also talked about the potential for environmental risks with genetically modified organisms,
GMOs.
like crops or animals.
Right.
So what are some of the concerns there?
Well, there's always the worry about unintended consequences.
Unintended consequence.
Like, for instance, what if genetically modified crops start to outcompete native plants?
Oh, yeah, that would be bad.
Could lead to a loss of biodiversity.
Okay.
We have to consider things like gene flow, too.
Gene flow, what's that?
So that's where modified genes can actually spread to wild populations.
Okay.
And we really don't know what kind of impact that could have. It could be harmful.
So it's about understanding that ecosystems are connected, right?
Absolutely.
That, changes we make in one area can have a ripple effect.
Totally. It's a web.
We're not just isolated actors here.
No, we're part of a much bigger system.
And I think a lot of the fear around genetic engineering, it comes from this idea of playing God, right?
Right. Messing with nature.
The script mentions some critics who argue that we're basically overstepping our bounds.
Yeah, that we're messing with the very essence of life.
Right. Like, we're not supposed to have this kind of power. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important to, to acknowledge that that fear comes from a good place.
Okay.
It's a genuine concern for the future.
Sure.
We're talking about a technology that gives us immense power.
Right?
And with that power comes enormous responsibility.
Responsibility, yeah.
So it's natural for people to question, are we wise enough to handle this?
Right. Are we ready for this?
Are we maybe overstepping boundaries that we don't even fully understand yet?
Yeah, it's like venturing into uncharted territory.
It is.
Where, the map hasn't been drawn.
No maps.
And we don't know what we might encounter. The script also brings up this idea that maybe we're chasing after some unrealistic ideal of perfection.
Perfection.
Yeah, and that, maybe embracing diversity is just as important as eliminating suffering.
It's a great point.
I thought that was really insightful.
Yeah.
If we just focus on erasing everything we see as imperfect,
Right.
we lose sight of, the beauty of human variation.
Totally.
Diversity is what makes us resilient as a species.
It's what makes life interesting.
What makes life interesting.
It enriches our lives.
And it's a good reminder that progress doesn't always mean getting rid of what we don't like.
Exactly.
It can also mean accepting and celebrating the full spectrum of human experience.
The good and the bad, the messy and the beautiful.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
The potential, the concerns, the what-ifs.
The big picture.
But where do we go from here?
Right.
What does the future of genetic engineering actually look like?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Is it a utopia or a dystopia?
It could be either.
That's what the podcast script seems to suggest.
Right. Both are definitely possible.
So paint me a picture. Utopia first. What does that look like?
Okay, so imagine a world where diseases like cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, they're just gone.
Yeah.
Eradicated.
No more suffering.
No more suffering.
Okay, what else?
Imagine a world without food shortages.
How's that possible?
Genetically modified crops.
Okay.
Engineered to thrive in any environment, no matter how harsh.
Wow.
We could feed everyone on the planet.
That sounds pretty amazing.
It does.
But the script also paints a much darker picture, right?
Yeah.
What's the dystopian version of this future?
Think about a world where genetic enhancements are only for the rich.
Okay.
A luxury, like a fancy car or a designer handbag.
So only the wealthy can afford to make their children smarter, stronger, better looking.
Exactly. It creates a whole new kind of class divide.
Based on biology.
Exactly.
That's pretty scary.
It is. And it's a real possibility if we're not careful.
So what can we do? How do we make sure that genetic engineering is used for good?
Well, I think the first step is awareness.
Awareness, okay.
We need to keep having these conversations. We need to educate people about the science,
Right.
the potential benefits, but also the risks.
So it can't just be scientists talking about this.
No, absolutely not. This has to be a societal discussion.
Everybody needs to be involved.
Everybody.
Because ultimately, these technologies are going to impact all of us.
Right, we're all in this together.
And we also have to think about regulation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, huge.
Oversight.
Crucial.
How do we prevent misuse?
Exactly.
How do we ensure that there's equitable access?
These are the big questions.
And they're not easy to answer.
No, they're not.
It's a lot to think about. It really feels like this one topic, genetic engineering, it's opened up like a Pandora's box.
It has. A whole world of possibilities and also potential dangers.
Possibilities and dangers. But it's exciting, right?
It is.
It's an incredible time to be alive.
We're on the cusp of a scientific revolution.
And we have a chance to help shape the future.
We do.
Yeah.
We can't just sit back and watch it happen.
We have to be active participants.
Absolutely.
Ask the tough questions, make sure our voices are heard. And as we wrap up this deep dive into genetic engineering, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, sure.
The podcast script you share, it ended with a question, and it's one that's really stuck with me.
What's the question?
Imagine a future where genetic engineering is just commonplace.
Okay.
It's just something we do.
Part of life.
Would you edit your child's DNA?
Wow.
Would you support genetic enhancements for intelligence,
For looks.
athletic ability? It's a question that makes you really confront your own values.
Your own beliefs.
What do you think?
That's something I'm going to have to think about.
It's a question we all need to grapple with because the answers are going to shape the future.
Yeah.
And it's a future we're all creating together. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and a huge thank you to our expert for walking us through all of this.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
We hope this has given you some food for thought as you continue to explore the world of genetic engineering.